Be talking about the data seeder today. Some of you may have been exposed to it, some have not, but we're going to kind of go into the technical details, and we're going to go over sort of the overall, but also a little bit more of the technical. We'll go over some Ruby and some other things. So, yeah, like I said, thank you for joining. My name is Dan. I am a staff here at SET at GitLab, and I'm joined here with Logan. Many of you already know Logan. And yeah, so let's get started, I suppose, now with the why. So the data seeder was designed back around circa 2022 in the beginning of the year, because we wanted to tackle, we had a few challenges we needed to overcome. One of those challenges being, what does beautiful data look like? We wanted to tell a story of GitLab in a way that you could go from start to finish and sort of the project life cycle and how it goes from A to B and B to C and so on. But we had some problems, at least with the API. It only goes so far. You can't do some things with the API that the data seeder can, and we'll get into that. But yeah, we wanted to be able to see data into all environments, not just development environments, but also production environments and in GitLab SaaS as well. So enter data seeder. So the data seeder seeds data. We can use it to see test data, demo data, data that's in the past, data that's in the future, all within GitLab. And we want it to be idempotent, familiar, and future-proof. So starting with idempotent, like I said, we will idempotent, meaning that once you run it once and run it a second time, you should have the same exact result. So Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. One of my favorite quotes. I'm expecting the same. No, that's not right. There we go. There we go. That's better. Expecting different results. So when you use a data seeder, it should be the same each time it's run. And we want it to be familiar, usable by all of the GitLab community, not just the engineers here at GitLab, but also outside of GitLab. And in that spirit of the familiarity, we chose FactoryBot to sort of be the engine behind the data seeder. So what you're looking at right now here is a seed called Beautiful Data. This is basically just creating 4 labels. We have group labels that belong to a specific group. We have priority 1, 2, 3, and 4 with specific colors. We have a project and an issue inside that project that is assigned the P1 label. So like I said, with that familiarity, the data seeder uses FactoryBot in the backend, which GitLab engineers already use, and most Rails engineers, even outside of GitLab, also use FactoryBot. So it's a very familiar language. It's very efficient and clean when it comes to fabricating data. So we also have different parsers, YAML and JSON. So that kind of opens it up a little bit more to the wider community, to people that might not want to fiddle with Ruby, but it also provides the ability to hook into APIs. So if developers wanted to develop an API to basically generate seeds, they could do something like that. And in using FactoryBot, one of the decisions behind it was to leverage the underlying ORM to create database records at the lowest level possible. So like I said, we completely bypass, or at least not even, we don't use the GitLab REST API. The result of this is the fastest possible fabrication when it comes to data, and it'll create records. And while the seeder can be used to create ephemeral records to test on, it can also create permanent records on live environments. So that was sort of the design consideration. And we can even, using FactoryBot, bypass Rails model validation, which it's something that may not be recommended, but the fact that we can do that is really cool.
Sweet. You want me to share my screen quick?
Yep.
And then I'll go here. So if you are like me, you probably are someone that does not have a ton of tacit knowledge around using FactoryBot or even GitLab factories in general, right? You can imagine trying to write how to build out a merge train just from the factories. It involves a lot of backend configurations, linking different things on the database. You can't just look at merge trains and be like, oh, I need to do this, this, and this. And that's really where the docs came from. A large part of the docs page is actually listing out all of the current factories in GitLab and Dataseeder as they're synced and presenting it to you in a digestible way. So you can go to the docs page, figure out, okay, this time I want to write an issue, right? How do I even start there? What's available to me? I know in the UI, I can add a name, description, maybe past that, you're not really thinking of every option that's available to you. On our docs page, using issues, for example, we list three different things. One, it's going to be the definitions. So what the definitions are links to the actual place in the code base for EE or for regular where that spec lives, which allows you to figure out, okay, this is how I'm actually going to be interacting with GitLab, right? If I set the trait confidential, what does that actually do outside of, I know on the UI it makes it confidential. And the same with attributes. Attributes expect a variable. What variable can I pass it? Is it looking for a number? Is it looking for a Boolean? That's really what our docs page set out to do. So if I go ahead and pull up the docs page, hopefully everyone can still see my screen. Sweet. So this is what it looks like, right? On the left-hand side, we'll cover some of the guides and examples in a little bit, but it literally lists every single factory currently in the GitLab code base. It's quite a lot. It is a little overwhelming, but as you start to write your own seed files, it gets pretty easy to jump through what's needed. If we go back to issues, basically what a trait is something you can just set on that object. So you saw in the Ruby code, if you were to just add the trait confidential on the UI, you're going to see that it's confidential. Something like an attribute using title, for example, right? That's looking for a string. You're going to provide the string of my first issue, something similar to that, and it's just going to auto import it into your issue. If we actually take a look at the definitions, this is what I find the most helpful, right? Sometimes the conversion from merge request to what we reference it in the factory is different. How do I know if it's capital M, capital R, if there's an underscore, etc.? And then it allows you to see, okay, here are the various attributes. What are they looking for? Relative position, right? I don't really know. Maybe it's looking for first. If I check out the description, I can see, oh, it's looking for a number, right? I can see that if I just add confidential, it's just going to set confidential to true. And that really helps you use the building blocks of the factories to kind of come together to create the larger story, some of which we'll talk about in a few slides. So I'll hand it back to you, Dan.
Thank you. Yes, so with the factories, we will well, with the decision to use FactoryBot, we want it to be future-proof as well. So the data seeder is designed to be future-proof. And what I mean by that, you saw Logan bring up the code of the factory. So in that factory, every GitLab engineer that touches unit tests or feature tests, they use these factories and they alter these factories. So they're maintained by it. So when a factory is changed, the data seeder will already be aware of that change. So for example, if a GitLab AI feature is released tomorrow, the data seeder will already be up to date with that change that it can see it. And we wanted to be able to seed anything. So for instance, give me a project that was created 2 weeks ago, has 12 issues, 5 of them needed to be added to a group milestone that's already expired. And the project should have a pipeline that finished 4 days ago and it failed from a DAST failure, but the next one passed. So we can kind of build that story using the data seeder. And it could seed any model that exists within GitLab. And we wanted a solution that was time relevant and that could be seeded in any environment. So like I said, FactoryBot traditionally is used for the local development, but we wanted to expand it out to production. And when I mean any GitLab model, I mean any GitLab model. Anything that you can think of, from jobs, pipelines, AI, self-hosted models, and everything in between. And what I mean, and now time relevant. So the data seeder is time relevant, and what that means is we can create data that is time relative and relevant. So we can create relative dates to 6 days ago. You can see that this project is an archived project. By the way, that archived is the trait that Logan was mentioning. And the created at is an attribute in that factory. And we can set that to 6 days ago. We can set that to 5 days ago, 4 days ago, 1 day from now. So you can see the sort of time relative dating that you can do. And then, like I said, in this issue, well, we have a project that's archived, created 6 days ago. In that project, we have an issue that is confidential. It's a closed issue. It was created 5 days ago. It was closed 4 days ago, and its due date was tomorrow. And we can use that any sort of thing. So like 5 days ago, 4 days ago, 4 days from now, 1 year from now, tomorrow, anything like that. All right. And by any environment, basically the way the data seeder works is that it's on the command line using rake. So anywhere that you have access to the rake CLI, you can use data seeder. So that includes any self-managed instances, including Docker. And we're able to seed any environment or using installations. So during installation, we can, let's say we have a seed file that we want to execute as soon as GitLab installs on a machine. So let's say a customer purchases GitLab. As soon as they install it, they have an option that says, hey, do you want to populate this self-managed instance with a lot of data, just so you can play around with it? That's sort of an option that we can provide with the data seeder. Because the data seeder is shipped with GitLab as well as the seed files are. And then it also is able to seed environments that are already in existence. And we are working towards the ability to seed GitLab namespaces using the UI. It is available through the API, but that's using direct transfer. Yeah. And I'll send it back to Logan.
Sweet. Let me share my screen. So going back to that any environment idea, it's not really familiar, I think, to a lot of people right off the get-go, right? Where in the process should you seed your demo data during an installation? How do you even do a Docker installation, etc.? Those are things we also wanted to cover in our docs. So on the quick start guides, you'll see things like, if I'm going to use GDK, how should I set up GDK, and when in that process should I actually run the seed file? Because again, GitLab comes pre-shipped with seed files to set up a test group. Additionally, you saw that Dan was highlighting how to create a project, how to create an issue. Some of the more common workflows we do cover in examples, because trying to guess, like, you can look at the description, look at the code, and piece together how you should create an issue. We wanted to kind of make that process easier. So some of the more common things you would do through seeding, we have listed out. And it's also not just limited to Ruby. Again, we show the YAML, the JSON example, and how to actually do more than just create, right? You can imagine with an issue, you might want to link it to another issue, link it to an MR, and really these are the building blocks for kind of starting to create the stories, especially on the sales side, that we like to use the seeder to tell. And just highlighting more traits and attributes. You saw how many factories there are. There's quite a few. And you can imagine it kind of gets a little convoluted, right? There's thousands and thousands of factories. If I want to create a demo that precedes merge trains, that's a ton of work. And really what that starts to look like, just pulling up one of our active seed files, is they get pretty big, right? If you notice the scroll bar on the right-hand side, it's barely moving as I start to move down the page. but it starts to come together. Really, what's nice about this, and I'll touch more on this in a second, is the fact that it is creating things with code, right? When you're writing it in Ruby, I can dynamically change things like the title. It's easy enough to link to the epics when I define them as an object, create multiple files, multiple options, so that as you're writing out your seed file, your first one probably will just be a few lines, right? With a group, project, some issues, but you can kind of see how crazy it can get, as this is a part of our Tanuki Racing Studios project, which I'll touch on in a second. And that leads us into how is the data seeder currently being used. We've talked a lot about why we created it, etc. Where are we at today with its use? On the solution architecture and sales side, we are pretty consistently using it in demos and hands-on content. The engineering team is using it for PG upgrade testing. And then internally, we're also building more tools to support it. Things like automatic seed generation, which we'll get into in a little bit. Tanuki Racing Studios. This is the project that the sales team is using. And you might ask why? Why do we have this branded project to do things? And really the end goal of it is to gamify learning GitLab. GitLab, as the one DevSecOps platform, has a ton of content. There's so many different things you can do in the platform, and gamifying it to make it fun, make it realistic, was a great answer to better connect with our customers. So at the top level, what is Tanuki Racing Studios? It's just a group with 4 different projects: a model ops, iOS, Android, and a Ruby application. These are all actively developed applications maintained by the demo architecture team. So we want it to feel real, right? What would you rather have if you're trying to learn GitLab? A blank project where you need to import 5 different things, set up all the issues, milestones, etc. yourself, and you kind of lose that magic of like joining a team and working on it, or have something pre-seeded with all that data ready for you. The other benefit that I briefly touched on is it's really easy to type change, right? So you can imagine, because it's created as code, you can just change from Tanuki Racing Studios suddenly to Tanuki Tech, Tanuki Towers, better connect with the banking industry, airlines industry, etc. But your demoers just need to learn one workflow. Because really all that's doing is it's a cosmetic change. The kind of demos we build, it shouldn't matter what the name of the issue or the project is, because it's all just going to flow the same way. And some more information. Like I was saying, these projects aren't just like dummy projects that we have you import or fork. They're meant to simulate active development as if you were joining the team for the first time and asked to contribute. We have different things like a whole ton of commits, branches, a created date in the past, so that when you as a demo or your customer joins, you can see this and feel like it's a live project, right? I think for the demoers, it's also really nice because every single time you load it up, you're going to have the same clean slate, and it's not like it's dynamically changing, or if we were creating it by bots every day, the issue typically referenced every day moves one day further down the line. It really helps us tell stories. Speaking of stories, plan data is probably the best place to start. We showed issues, we showed how you can configure them. I think because of GitLab being the one DevSecOps platform, where we usually start in our demos is at the plan stage, right? So if you want to tell this story, let's say with the contactless check-in process, maybe you had some issue where the security engineer found a vulnerability on this issue. So you jump in with the customer, read the security engineer's comment, and then walk through that process to fix the vulnerability. That tends to land much better than, hey, we're going to create a project, write the vulnerability ourselves, and then show how GitLab can fix it, right? That doesn't really flow as well. And things that the data seeder really enables are already shown on the screen, right? You can see that we can link to different milestones. We can set our own labels, names, descriptions. We can set issues created in the past, in the future. And arguably one of my favorite things, we can create fake users to leave comments so that every single time we seed, we know on the frequent flyer status issue, we're already going to have a comment from the security engineer. And it allows us, because there's and 20 issues per project to come up with a ton of different workflows. That is a demo where you just need to know which issue to go to, run through it from there. And this ties into more the milestones, right? So you saw the issues, you saw the project. Now we even have milestones that are simulating real development with the Tanuki Racing Studios, which is meant to be a video game company. The story that it's focused on is developing a battle pass for a video game. You just completed the development for your season 6 battle pass. You're starting season 7 and you're planning 8. That has a wide range of different stories we can tell. Something like jump into season 6, which finished on January 22nd, and let's choose one of those 4 issues to then bring into our current battle pass, work on it, and then maybe we end up pushing the rest to a future battle pass. You can imagine as you walk through that story with the customer, you're touching on things like CI/CD, security, analytics, etc., all that are also pre-baked with the data seeder. And Dan mentioned one of the original goals of the working group was to create beautiful data. In my opinion, I think that is the one place that the data seeder excels more than any other tool, in the way that when we're demoing, let's say in this case, a milestone, we don't have to go to gitlab.com and find an old milestone without any private information to show the customer, right? One, it might not work out well. Maybe they wanted that feature to be done sooner, so now you're just bringing in bad feelings. Or 2, you're just faking the data. Maybe you're logging in every day, moving issues around, resetting them, etc. There's a ton of maintenance with that, and the dates don't always end up aligning. With the data seeder, we can just pre-seed milestones with burn down charts, burn up charts instantly, right? Make them look nice. We can tell the story that we want to, and then ensure that every single time we run this demo, it's reset the exact way we want it. There's nothing we have to do to go back and reset everything. And to kind of show you what that looks like, we're going to take a live look into one of our seeded projects. So this is my namespace where every day I just seed a bunch of different types of Tanuki Racing. So in this case, it's treats, it's our retail focused one, and we can go ahead and take a look at the milestones. If I was doing this with a customer, right, I just direct transfer this group into one of the groups that I'm demoing in. And then instead of just showing them a slide, like, look how great our milestones are, now we have an interactive experience. I can even add them to this project to mess around with it, see what they want to do, etc. And it's interactive, right? I can look here, it's preceded with all the information. We know the weight of the entire milestone. I can jump into one of the issues, decide, okay, wait, we actually, did complete this work. Let's go ahead and close it. And it's interactive, right? I think that goes a long way, because now we should only see the 3 open issues. We're able to show GitLab in a live environment. This looks like it's an actively developed application. It's not just a slide that I threw up and we're like, hey, go for it. In the future, we're working on it to build out all of the analytics capabilities. All of that's able to be seeded, right? So if we're thinking about anything in these columns, these are things that we can pre-seed. We can pre-seed incidents, pre-seed best practices. There's a lot that we can do, a lot that we're working on. So keep your eyes out in the future for future Tanuki Racing Studios updates. And then I will hand it back to you, Dan.
Okay. Yeah, so more on this too. Remember that we said earlier that it was time relative. So you could imagine, a year in the future, this specific project might not be relevant anymore. These burn up charts would look very different considering the time passage. So with the dependency, being able to run that seed file again and again and again, it's all time relevant. So this seed specifically that Logan's mentioning is time relevant. All the dates are basically predetermined at the time that you run the seed. So, like I said, the expired milestones, the upcoming and all that. So, one more use that we use the data seeder for is PG upgrade testing. So the engineering department tests basically let's say version 14 of Postgres to version 15. during those upgrades, a lot of schema changes and the schematic for the database changes. We may change a column type, we may add a column, we may even remove one. So the data seeder is used to help test that. And the way that it's helped is, I'm going to take a quick look at the seed file. We essentially get all of the factories that are existing within GitLab. We exclude some, and then we basically fabricate the rest. So that essentially creates a test database in CI that will populate all kinds of data inside this database using, again, that lower ORM level, and then it will perform that test. So everything that's included and not excluded will be fabricated inside the database. It runs the test, it wipes it all down. So that's another way we're using the the data seeder. And next up is the automatic seed generation. So there has been tooling there has been tooling surrounding the data seeder being created. One of these to note is the automatic seed generation, and it's pretty neat tool. Essentially, we'll have it where let's say, for instance, you have a group namespace that you want to, with all the dates and all the issues and projects that you create under these groups, you run a script that will essentially export that entire namespace into a seed file. So that way you can run it tomorrow, run it the next day, and it'll be exactly the same without any sort of expired dates or anything like that. So that's a pretty neat tool that's coming out. And all right, so let's get a little bit more technical. I want to cover a little bit on the rake task. So like I said before, the CLI, the data seeder operates on the rake level. So it'll execute rake task, and the rake kicks up the data seeder, and the data seeder creates a top level group. And that top level group will basically house everything that will be seeded, subgroups, projects, etc. And then the seeder will inject FactoryBot inside of the seed file, and then FactoryBot takes it from there and starts doing its thing. So running FactoryBot in production environments, I'll reiterate once more that we're sort of on the bleeding edge on this sort of thing, because FactoryBot traditionally is used in a test and development type of scenario where you're wanting to create ephemeral data to test on, but the data seeder unlocks that for production environments. So we'll kind of go into the how of how that happened. So we're going to take a look at GitLab's gem file. This was taken a few days ago of the active gem file. On the left is the active gem file. You'll see that the Rails FactoryBot gem is right here, and it's nested within a group of development and test. So essentially, we just need to pull that up outside of the group and put it on the top. So now it's on the top level of the gem file, which means that a bundle install in the machine or where GitLab's hosted will essentially install that gem in the production level, so it's accessible in production. So I said so we extracted the FactoryBot gem out of the gem file and out of the group into the top level. We run a bundle install to make sure that the gems are installed. And does anyone have any guess as to what is missing? So there's one more step that we need to complete. Does anyone want to take a guess? So what's missing is the factories themselves. GitLab by default, and any installation and any time you ship GitLab, anything spec related and anything test related is not included. Many reasons for that. One is just it's bloat. You don't need a bunch of test files that you're using to test GitLab. They expect customers expect it to already be tested. So why include that? And it's extra space. So what we do in the data seeder is we do a sparse checkout of all the factories. We do this using just a git checkout, a sparse checkout, and it will check out the spec factories directory and the EE spec factories directory. So it'll essentially pull all of those factories into wherever the environment is. So that could be a self-hosted customer instance, or wherever it might be. Now the instance has access to factory bot, so we're able to, or in all the factories, so we're able to run those. And so in effect, this seed file, in conclusion for all that, this seed file, which creates a private project named Tanuki Motors, created at some specific date. It's got 7 stars. It's got a description, and then we create 150 issues belonging to the project. We create a group label called priority low, and we assign that label to the issues, all 150 of them. We'll close the first 50 of them, and then we'll add the remaining issues to some epic. So it turns all of this into this. Now there's a lot more usage of what could be done. So we've gone over sort of the demo and how beautiful data looks like, but there's a lot more opportunity for where data seeder could shine. One glowing example I have is the engineering, when all of engineering writes their end-to-end tests, there's a lot of data that needs to be present, especially since we all run against different environments, staging, ref, production, release. So data seeder, in theory, can be executed as soon as an install happens to create a whole bunch of data that end-to-end tests can rely on. Currently, the infrastructure, the framework, will create resources as needed. And we'll use the API to do that. But we could imagine a scenario where we have maybe a seed for every single test that's running. And then every time we spin, it doesn't matter if it's development, GDK, staging, we have a sort of a pool of data that we have available that the resources and that the tests can access right beforehand, even on install. So, and again, this is way faster than the API. So yeah, so what's next for data seeder? Like I said, it's already being used in a few different places, but we have a long way to go. This is sort of a general roadmap of what we're looking at. There's a lot of opportunity for reuse, but there's also a lot of internal things that can change and that should change. Notable ones is a WYSIWYG editor. So what you see is what you get. I kind of picture a web builder. So you have a web page that you can build a seed file using your mouse and your keyboard. You would drag and drop, I want an issue in a project. So I drag an issue into the project. It links automatically. You check a box for confidential. You set the created date. You have a date picker. So I wanted it closed at yesterday at 2 p.m. Yeah, and then that's the WYSIWYG, and then a button on GitLab's UI is another notable one. One of the original goals, one of the challenges we sought to overcome was how could we have it where if we create a group in GitLab, so if I'm at gitlab.com, I create a new group, we have templates that we can create projects with, but not really a template for our group. So picture a button on the UI that says, would you like to pre-populate this with data? So we use a button there. With one click, you set the seed. I guess it would be 2 clicks. You'd set the seed that you want to seed with, and then you click seed. And then that way, a customer or anyone else could create a new group with all this data already in it. So that's something to keep. And then the next one is linting and static analysis. So the seeds are very difficult to track sometimes. It's very powerful, but at the cost of sort of ease of use. One of the reasons why JSON and YAML was put out there is that ease of use. But there's a long way to go, and I think static analysis and linting is probably one of the next steps, is being able to statically analyze the save file to make sure that there's no issues. So for instance, you misspell confidential, or you specify an attribute, or you don't specify an attribute. I can imagine a nice little command that you could run to verify those. I included the issues, and I already covered sort of how do we leverage the seeder for lower and higher levels of testing. I think that's one of the biggest opportunities, is the testing realm, is especially in the different environments. And then also there's an issue tracker. Feel free to click that to see what where we are with the issues and their statuses. Everyone can contribute. And here's the source for the data seeder, the documentation site. And yeah, like I said, the data seeder ships with GitLab, and as do all of the seed files. Well, the seed file that doesn't ship is the one Logan mentioned, but eventually I'd love to see that in the actual being shipped with GitLab. But yeah, so those, please feel free to contribute. It's a little bit short. We still have 10 minutes, but that's actually probably a good time. That way we can get any questions answered. So thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. And are there any questions? I'm gonna go ahead and open up the doc, so I can see if people added stuff.
And just for everyone's use, I did link the slides and added a link to the docs in the chat if you want to check those out.
The doc is actually not everybody has access to it. But
the documentation site or the document?
the Google Doc that's in the meeting invite.
Okay.
We could just verbalize questions then.
Sure.
That's my mistake.
No problem. One that I
Okay.
have, we have in performance enablement, we've got an initiative to create a realistic data store for doing performance testing. Any feelings on how performant the data seeder is for doing a large data load?
Yeah, so like I said, it's not using the UI. It's not using the EUI. It's not using the REST API. It is using the lowest level possible of data creation. I guess suppose short of data, like in actually executing SQL commands to create stuff. I suppose that might be the next best, but I'm confident to say it is the fastest method of fabrication possible that we have.
Sure. Yeah. I've created an issue to investigate linking our effort to this to see what overlap exists.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Any other questions? Comments?
I just was thinking about the end test we run in pipelines, and I guess we already use Seeder there, right? To pre-create some data for the tests.
So
like for example, when we run test on GDK job.
So we use FactoryBot, yes, but not the data seeder. So we use the FactoryBot DSL, so like create project. So the transition will be very easy. But no, we don't use the data seeder. We use FactoryBot, and that uses the API. So we basically wrapped the API. When you call create project in an end-to-end test, it will fabricate via the API, whereas this is the lowest level of creation.
Yeah. I didn't mean like the tests themselves, but like before the tests actually start, we probably populate something there, right? Maybe a few projects or few groups that tests and use later.
I believe I remember Tiffany working on something like that. I don't know where we got with that. I know we track fabrication, but I don't think the fabrication happens on the lowest level. I think it still uses the, I don't know though. I'd have to look at that. But I'm pretty sure it's not using the data seeder. But that's definitely, so like I said, that was one of the biggest opportunities I think we had as you know, all of engineering, is that our end-to-end tests, you largely use the API, which a lot of test setup, you're not really testing the API, you're testing whatever you're testing. So having a predetermined set of data that your test expects on test load would be ideal, and data seeder would be fantastic for that.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
There's no other questions. I think we should be good to close out then. If you have any closing remarks, Dan.
No, thank you again for all of your attention, and thank you for coming. Yeah.
The only other thing I will plug, there is a data seeder Slack channel. So if you do search for that, it's pretty active. I monitor it pretty closely. I know Dan does as well. So if you are starting to write these files, I found it invaluable to be able to just ask questions and have other people double check my work. So definitely join that if interested. Otherwise, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.